The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the military base in Afghanistan, casting long shadows between the aircraft hangars. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand, leaving a streak of dust across her olive skin. The Apache helicopter she was working on towered above her like a mechanical beast, its twin rotors casting shade over the maintenance area. Maria had been assigned to the 3rd Battalion's aviation maintenance unit for 8 months now. At 26, she was one of the few female mechanics on the base, but she had earned her place through pure skill and determination. Her small hands could reach places others couldn't, and her attention to detail was legendary among the crew chiefs. Today felt different, though. The Apache she was servicing had just returned from a classified mission somewhere in the mountains near the Pakistani border. The pilot, Captain James Mitchell, had requested immediate maintenance before debriefing. That was unusual. Most pilots grab a shower and hot meal before worrying about their aircraft. Maria methodically cleaned the 30mm chain gun mounted beneath the helicopter's nose. The weapon was still warm from recent use, and she could smell the familiar scent of spent gunpowder mixed with desert dust. As she worked, she noticed scratches and dents along the fuselage that hadn't been there during the pre-flight inspection. Whatever mission this bird had flown, it had seen action. The base was unusually quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. Most of the personnel were either on patrol, sleeping off night shifts, or huddled in the air-conditioned command center. The only sounds were Maria's tools clinking against metal and the distant hum of generators powering the base's essential systems. Captain Mitchell emerged from the operations building, his flight suit still damp with sweat. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of flying in harsh conditions. Maria had worked on his aircraft before, but they rarely spoke beyond the necessary technical discussions. He was known as a serious pilot who kept to himself. As he approached the helicopter, Maria noticed something she had missed before. There was a small piece of fabric caught in one of the weapon mounts, fluttering slightly in the desert breeze. It looked like part of a uniform, but the color was wrong. Instead of the familiar desert camouflage of coalition forces, this fabric was a deep green with gold threading. Maria carefully extracted the fabric with her needle-nose pliers, holding it up to examine it more closely. The material was high quality, almost silk-like, with intricate embroidery that seemed foreign. She had seen many different uniforms during her deployment, but this was something new. "Find something interesting, Sergeant." Captain Mitchell's voice made her jump. She hadn't heard him approach over the sound of her own work. "Just some debris caught in the weapon mount, sir," Maria replied, holding up the fabric. "Probably picked it up during the mission." Mitchell's expression changed subtly when he saw the green material. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his eyes darted quickly around the maintenance area to see if anyone else was watching. "I'll take that," he said, extending his hand. "Need to include it in my mission report." Maria hesitated for a moment. Something about the pilot's reaction seemed off. In her experience, debris from missions was usually discarded or turned over to intelligence if it seemed significant. But Mitchell's request felt more personal, almost urgent. "Of course, sir," she said, handing over the fabric. As their hands briefly touched during the transfer, she noticed that Mitchell's were shaking slightly. For a pilot known for his steady nerves, this was concerning. Mitchell pocketed the fabric quickly and turned his attention to the helicopter's weapons systems. "How's the gun looking, Sergeant? Any problems with the ammunition feed?" "Everything checks out, sir. Fired about 200 rounds based on the ammo count. The barrel's still within temperature specs, and the feed mechanism is cycling smoothly." Maria kept her voice professional, but her mind was racing with questions about the mysterious fabric. As she continued her inspection, cleaning and checking each component methodically, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled onto something important. The fabric's quality suggested it belonged to someone of high rank, and the gold threading indicated military insignia of some kind. But from which military? Captain Mitchell watched her work in unusual silence. Normally, pilots used maintenance time to chat with the ground crew, sharing stories or asking technical questions about their aircraft. But Today, Mitchell seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing toward the base perimeter as if expecting someone. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the desert silence. A convoy of black SUVs was making its way through the base's main gate, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. These weren't the usual military vehicles Maria was accustomed to seeing. They looked more like the transportation used by intelligence agencies or high-ranking officials. Mitchell tensed visibly when he saw the convoy. "How much longer on that inspection, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of anxiety. "About 15 more minutes, sir. Just need to check the targeting systems and run a final diagnostic on the avionics." Maria glanced at the approaching vehicles, then back at the pilot. "Is everything all right, Captain?" Before Mitchell could answer, the convoy pulled up near the helicopter maintenance area. Several men in civilian clothes emerged from the vehicles, scanning the area with the practiced eyes of security professionals. In the lead was a woman in her 40s, wearing a crisp business suit that seemed entirely out of place in the desert environment. Maria recognized the type immediately. She had seen enough intelligence officers during her deployment to know one when she saw one. But this woman carried herself with an authority that suggested she was far above the usual CIA or military intelligence operatives who occasionally visited the base. "Captain Mitchell," the woman called out as she approached. "We need to talk." Mitchell's face went pale beneath his tan. He glanced at Maria, then back at the woman. "Ma'am, I was just completing my post-flight maintenance. Perhaps we could discuss this in the briefing room." "I think here is fine," the woman replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. She looked at Maria with calculating eyes. "You're Sergeant Santos, correct? The mechanic working on this aircraft?" Maria straightened instinctively. Being addressed by name by someone she had never met was never a good sign. "Yes, ma'am. Is there a problem?" "That depends," the woman said, stepping closer to examine the Apache helicopter. "Did you find anything unusual during your inspection? Any foreign objects or materials?" The question hit Maria like a physical blow. Somehow, this woman knew about the fabric. But how could she possibly know about something that had happened only minutes ago? Unless... Maria's mind raced through the possibilities. Had Mitchell reported the fabric already? Was this woman monitoring their communications? Or was there something much larger going on that she had accidentally stumbled into? "I found some debris in the weapon mount," Maria said carefully, watching both Mitchell and the woman for reactions. Captain Mitchell took it for his mission report. The woman's eyes sharpened with interest. She turned to Mitchell, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Captain, I believe we need to have a very serious conversation about your mission parameters and what you actually encountered out there." As the desert wind picked up, swirling dust around the small group, Maria realized that her routine maintenance job had just become something much more complicated. The fabric she had found was clearly more significant than simple debris, and whatever Captain Mitchell had seen or done during his mission had attracted the attention of some very important people. The woman gestured to her security detail, and they began forming a loose perimeter around the helicopter. This wasn't a casual inquiry anymore. It was beginning to look like an interrogation, and Maria was starting to understand that she might be in more trouble than she had ever imagined. The woman introduced herself as Director Sarah Chun from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Her credentials looked genuine, but Maria had learned during her deployment that in this part of the world, nothing was ever quite what it seemed. Chen's security team had efficiently cleared the maintenance area of other personnel, creating an isolated bubble around the Apache helicopter. "Sergeant Santos, I need you to think very carefully about what you saw," Director Chen said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "The fabric you found may be connected to a situation that could have significant implications for our operations in this region." Captain Mitchell shifted nervously beside the helicopter. "Ma'am, with respect, Sergeant Santos was just doing her job. She doesn't need to be involved in this." "I'm afraid that's no longer our decision to make, Captain," Chen replied coolly. "The moment she found that fabric, she became involved. The question now is how much she actually knows about what you encountered during your mission." Maria felt a chill despite the desert heat. She looked between the two officers, trying to piece together what was happening. "I don't know anything about the mission details, ma'am. I only maintain the aircraft. Captain Mitchell never discussed operational matters with me. Director Chen studied Maria's face intently, as if searching for signs of deception. What did the fabric look like to you? Be specific about the colors, the texture, any markings you might have noticed. It was dark green, almost forest green, with gold thread embroidered through it. The material felt expensive, like silk or high-quality cotton. There seemed to be some kind of pattern in the embroidery, but I only had it for a few seconds before Captain Mitchell took it. Did the pattern look like writing? Symbols? Geometric designs? Maria closed her eyes, trying to recall the brief moment she had held the fabric. It looked like text, but not in English. The letters were different, more curved. And there's what might have been a symbol, something that looked like a bird or an eagle. Chun and Mitchell exchanged a meaningful look. Whatever Maria had described clearly had significance that she wasn't aware of. The director pulled out a secure phone and stepped away to make a quiet call, leaving Maria alone with the increasingly agitated pilot. "Listen, Sergeant," Mitchell said in a low voice, "what I'm about to tell you is classified, but you're already in this now. During my mission today, I wasn't supposed to engage any targets. It was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance flight over the border region." Maria nodded, encouraging him to continue. She had suspected the mission wasn't routine based on the condition of the helicopter and Mitchell's behavior. About 40 clicks northeast of here, I spotted movement in a valley that's supposed to be uninhabited. When I got closer for a better look, I saw a convoy of vehicles that definitely weren't Taliban or local militia. These were professional military vehicles, well-maintained and organized. Coalition Force? Maria asked. That's what I thought at first. But when I tried to raise them on radio, they opened fire. Shoulder-fired missiles, heavy machine guns, the works. These weren't insurgents with old AK-47s. They had modern equipment and knew how to use it. Maria felt her stomach tighten. Engaging unknown forces was exactly the kind of incident that could escalate into a major international crisis. "What did you do?" "I returned fire in self-defense." "Had to. They were trying to shoot me down. I managed to disable 2 of their vehicles and scatter the rest, but during the engagement, I got close enough to see their uniforms clearly." Mitchell paused, glancing toward Director Chun, who was still on her phone call. They were wearing Pakistani military uniforms, but not the regular army kind. These looked like special forces gear. The implications hit Maria immediately. Pakistan was officially an ally in the war against terrorism, but the relationship was complicated and often strained. If Captain Mitchell had engaged Pakistani special forces, even in self-defense, it could create a diplomatic nightmare. "The fabric you found," Mitchell continued, "it probably came from one of their officers. When I strafed their position, some of them were caught in the open. I think one of the pieces got caught on my aircraft during the attack." Director Chen finished her phone call and returned to the group. Her expression was grim. "I've just spoken with Pentagon intelligence. We've been tracking unusual Pakistani military activity in that region for the past 2 weeks. What Captain Mitchell encountered today confirms our worst fears." "Which are?" Maria asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "There's evidence that elements within the Pakistani military intelligence service have been providing support to Taliban commanders who have been giving us problems. The convoy Captain Mitchell engaged was likely transferring weapons or intelligence to insurgent groups." Maria struggled to process this information. She had joined the military to serve her country and support the mission in Afghanistan, but the complex web of alliances and betrayals in the region was difficult for anyone to navigate, let alone a maintenance sergeant. "What does this mean for Captain Mitchell? And what does it mean for me?" For Captain Mitchell, it means his actions today may have prevented a significant security breach, but it also means we have a major diplomatic problem to manage. Pakistan will likely claim their forces were conducting legitimate border security operations. Chen turned to Maria with a serious expression. "For you, Sergeant Santos, it means you're now a witness to evidence that could be crucial in how we handle this situation. The fabric you found may be the only physical proof we have of Pakistani involvement. But Captain Mitchell has it now," Maria pointed out. "Actually, he doesn't," Chin said, causing both Maria and Mitchell to look at her in confusion. Captain Mitchell, please empty your pockets. Looking puzzled but compliant, Mitchell reached into his flight suit pocket where he had placed the fabric. His expression changed to one of alarm when his hand came out empty. It's gone. I know I put it right here. Chin nodded grimly. While you two were talking, my team conducted a discreet search. We found the fabric, but we also found something else. It was a tracking device sewn into the material. Whoever that uniform belonged to, they wanted to be able to monitor its location. The implications were staggering. If the fabric contained a tracking device, it meant that hostile forces might know exactly where it was at any given moment. More importantly, they would know that it had been found and brought to the American base. Are you saying they know we have it? Mitchell asked. I'm saying they probably knew we had it before we even realized what we were dealing with. The question now is what they plan to do about it. As if summoned by her words, one of Chin's security team approached and spoke quietly into her ear. Her face went pale as she listened. When he finished, she turned back to Maria and Mitchell with obvious concern. We have a problem. Satellite surveillance shows a large force of unidentified vehicles approaching our perimeter from the northeast. They're about 20 minutes out and moving fast. Maria felt her heart rate spike. Could it be a coincidence? In this business, there are no coincidences. If they're tracking that fabric, they know exactly where it is, and they're coming to get it back. The base's alert sirens suddenly began wailing, their harsh sound cutting through the desert air. Over the base's public address system, the commanding officer's voice crackled. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Unknown hostile forces approaching from the northeast. All aircraft prepare for immediate departure. Around them, the base exploded into activity. Soldiers ran to defensive positions. Pilots sprinted toward their aircraft, and support personnel began implementing emergency protocols. But Maria stood frozen in the middle of it all, realizing that a simple maintenance job had somehow put her at the center of an international incident that was about to turn violent. Director Chun grabbed Maria's arm. Sergeant, I need you to come with me. You're the only person besides Captain Mitchell who can identify that fabric and testify about where it came from. If something happens to him, you might be our only witness. As they began moving toward the command bunker, Maria looked back at the Apache helicopter she had been working on just minutes earlier. Its weapons systems were fully armed and ready for combat. She had a sinking feeling that before this day was over, those guns would be firing again, and this time the target wouldn't be Taliban insurgents in some distant valley. The enemy was coming to them. The command bunker was a hive of activity as personnel monitored incoming intelligence and coordinated defensive measures. Director Chun led Maria to a secure briefing room where several high-ranking officers were already gathered around a large display screen showing real-time satellite footage of the approaching force. 37 vehicles, mixed military and civilian, reported the intelligence officer. They're maintaining communications, discipline, and moving in professional formation. This isn't a ragtag militia group. Colonel Williams, the base commander, turned to Chun with barely concealed frustration. Director, I need to know what we're dealing with here. My people are preparing to defend against an unknown enemy, and I still don't have a clear picture of what triggered this situation. Chin quickly briefed the assembled officers about Captain Mitchell's encounter and the significance of the fabric Maria had found. As she spoke, Maria watched the faces around the table grow increasingly grim. These were experienced military professionals who understood the implications of what they were hearing. So we potentially have elements of the Pakistani military conducting an armed assault on a U.S. base to recover evidence of their collaboration with terrorist organizations, Colonel Williams summarized. Is that correct? That's our assessment, Chun confirmed. The tracking device in the fabric suggests this was a planned operation. They wanted to be able to recover any evidence if something went wrong. Captain Mitchell, who had been called to the briefing, spoke up from across the table. Sir, with respect, these aren't regular Pakistani army troops. The way they moved, their equipment, their tactics, these are special operations personnel. They're not going to be deterred by our base defenses. Maria found herself speaking before she could stop herself. What if we give them what they want? Return the fabric and let them leave? The room fell silent, and Maria immediately regretted speaking up. But Director Chin nodded thoughtfully. Actually, Sergeant Santos raises an interesting point. What do we gain by keeping the fabric? Evidence, the intelligence officer replied. Physical proof of Pakistani involvement that we can use in diplomatic negotiations. Evidence that we obtained during an unauthorized cross-border engagement, Colonel Williams countered. From a legal standpoint, Captain Mitchell's mission puts us in a questionable position already. The debate was interrupted by the arrival of a communications specialist carrying an urgent message. Sir, we're receiving radio transmissions from the approaching force. They're requesting permission to enter the base to recover stolen Pakistani military property. Stolen? Mitchell's voice rose with indignation. They were shooting at me with missiles. Anything I took was fair game in self-defense. Colonel Williams held up a hand for silence. What exactly are they claiming was stolen? The communications specialist consulted his notes. They're saying that during a legitimate Pakistani border security operation, an American aircraft attacked their forces and took classified Pakistani military materials. They want the materials returned and the pilot responsible turned over for questioning. Maria felt sick to her stomach. Not only were they being asked to return evidence, but they wanted Captain Mitchell as well. The idea of turning over a fellow American to foreign forces was unthinkable. That's not happening, Colonel Williams said firmly. Send a response that will investigate their claims through proper diplomatic channels. In the meantime, they need to withdraw from our perimeter immediately. The base's defensive systems hummed to life around them. Machine gun positions were manned, anti-aircraft missiles were armed, and the few remaining aircraft were being prepared for emergency evacuation or combat operations. The base wasn't large enough or well-equipped enough to withstand a sustained assault by special forces, but they could make any attack costly. Director Chin pulled Maria aside as the military officers continued their planning. Sergeant, I need you to understand something. What happened today goes far beyond a simple border incident. We've uncovered evidence of a systematic betrayal by supposed allies. That fabric contains fibers and dyes that can be traced to specific Pakistani military units. With proper analysis, we can identify exactly which personnel were involved. But only if we keep it, Maria realized. Exactly. And only if we have witnesses who can testify about how it was obtained and where it came from. Captain Mitchell is an obvious target for retaliation. That makes you our backup plan. The weight of responsibility settled on Maria's shoulders like a physical burden. She had joined the military to fix helicopters and serve her country. She had never expected to become a key witness in an international crisis. The radio crackled with another transmission from the approaching force. This time, the tone was more threatening. They were demanding immediate compliance with their request, or they would take action to recover their property by force. Colonel Williams made his decision. We're not giving them the pilot or the evidence. All defensive positions prepare for possible assault. Air assets begin immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel. As alarms continued to sound throughout the base, Maria found herself being escorted to a helicopter along with other high-value personnel. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was fleeing in the same type of aircraft she had been maintaining when this crisis began. But as they lifted off, she could see the approaching dust cloud of the enemy force on the horizon. The base's defensive positions looked pitifully small against the vast expanse of desert. Whatever was about to happen, the soldiers below would bear the brunt of it. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the helicopter's radio from his Apache, which was providing escort for the evacuation. This is all my fault. If I had just avoided the engagement, none of this would have happened. Director Chin's response was immediate and firm. Captain, you did your job and uncovered a serious security threat. What's happening now is the consequence of Pakistani duplicity, not your actions. As they flew away from the base, Maria clutched the small evidence bag containing fiber samples that Chin's team had collected from the fabric. It seemed impossible that something so small could have such enormous consequences. But she was beginning to understand that in the complex world of international relations and military operations, the smallest details often had the biggest impact. The radio chatter from the base behind them told the story of what happened next. The Pakistani force attempted to enter the base by force, but encountered determined resistance. After a brief but intense firefight, they withdrew, apparently deciding that recovering the evidence wasn't worth the cost in lives and international complications. 3 days later, Maria found herself in a debriefing room in Germany, providing testimony to a joint committee of military and intelligence officials. The fabric analysis had confirmed everything Director Chun had suspected. The materials could be traced to a specific Pakistani Special Forces unit that had been operating in collaboration with Taliban commanders. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and severe. Pakistan denied any knowledge of unauthorized operations, claiming the unit had been conducting legitimate border security missions. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the incident led to a significant restructuring of Pakistani-American cooperation in the region. For Maria, the consequences were more personal. Her testimony had been crucial in establishing the facts of the case, and her careful handling of the evidence had preserved its integrity for analysis. She was awarded the Army Commendation Medal for her actions, though the circumstances remained classified. Captain Mitchell was cleared of any wrongdoing and returned to flight status. The two of them never spoke about the incident again, but there was an understanding between them. They had both been caught up in events much larger than themselves, and they had both done their duty despite the personal cost. Years later, when Maria had returned home and was working as a civilian aircraft mechanic, she would sometimes think about that day in the desert. She had learned that in the military, and especially in a combat zone, there was no such thing as a simple job. Even routine maintenance could become the center of an international crisis. The fabric that had started it all was eventually returned to Pakistani authorities through diplomatic channels, but not before it had served its purpose. The intelligence gathered from its analysis led to the identification and disruption of several other collaborative operations between Pakistani military elements and terrorist organizations. Maria never regretted her decision to examine the debris carefully and report what she found. Her attention to detail and commitment to doing her job properly had helped expose a serious security threat. But she also never forgot the lesson that in the complex world of military operations, even the smallest actions could have consequences that rippled far beyond anything she could imagine. The Apache helicopter she had been servicing that day was eventually retired from service and sent to a museum. Maria sometimes wondered if visitors looking at the static display could imagine the drama that had once surrounded that particular aircraft. But she kept the story to herself, as she had been trained to do. Some secrets were worth keeping, even long after the crisis had passed.